touches of our Hold Tight Quilt Sew Along. Once you have your quilt quilted, whether it's by hand or machine, and before you put on the binding, we're going to hand stitch the strings for the balloons. Now I've done this with 6-ply embroidery thread, and I will show you some other options that you can use as well. But this is the icing on the cake here. And today this video is going to be about hand stitching. So let's get started. The materials that you're going to need for hand stitching are a thimble. This is the type that I love to use. It's Colonial brand. It's a leather, suede leather that's sticky. You can reuse these thimbles over and over again until they lose their stickiness. So you can get several quilting sessions, sewing sessions from these. And they stick right to your finger. They protect it, particularly when we're doing these big chunky stitches with embroidery floss. You're going to need a larger needle, and this gets kind of tough on the fingers. So if that's the case, that it's going to be too tough for you to hand sew this through, I would suggest here's several things you can do. I'm using 6-ply, the 6 strands of a 6-ply embroidery floss. This is R-fill floss. That way I can really get the big definition of the quilting stitches here. But you could divide this. Since there's 6 strands, you can divide it into 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as thick as you want it. And as thick as you want it because you're going to need to thread this needle. Now I'm using embroidery needles for this because they have a large eye. This set that I have from Clover is a number 3 to 9, so I have a variety of sizes depending upon the thickness of my thread. Another option for thread is pearl cotton. Now this is a woven, or not a woven, a twisted non-divisible thread, and it's about, it feels very similar in thickness to, just maybe about 1 strand thinner than a 6-strand ply. But what is nice about it, because it's twisted, the threads stay together tighter. So, but I'm using the floss, and I have my thimble. You'll definitely want a thimble, whether it's a traditional type or the sticky type. I prefer these. So, and then you have your needle, and you have different sizes to select from. It looks like I'm using the 9 on this. Okay, so to hand, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I've almost got this second top done, and I wanted to show you, I left this last stitching, so of course we can use this as our demonstration, but I wanted to show you how I marked out the strings. Now, when you look at, let's go back and look at the big quilt here on the wall. I've taken where the points of the balloons are, and instead of converging all to the same corner, I've sort of spaced them out a bit, and just with my tape masked out a straight line as a guide to the different points that I want. This one I ran all the way through 3 balloons and directly to the corner there. So it's totally up to you where you want your strings to go and which balloons you want strings. You can either take a ruler and a marking tool of your choice and mark it out, or use a to score it. I like to use tape in this instance because I can get the straight line, I can remove it, there's no marks left on the quilt when I'm done. So with most in any kind of stitching, you want about an 18-inch length. I just kind of use from where my armpit is to the end of my hand, and that seems to be about the right length for me. Get rid of these here out of the way. So a good way to thread your needle with an embroidery floss. It's a little tricky. If you try to stick this into the eye of the needle here, it's going to want to split. So take your needle and make a loop with the fabric to pinch the fabric together, or the thread. So I've pinched the thread together. Slide the needle out, and now I've got this in my fingers. Let's see if I can do this on camera here. But I've got this captured in my fingers here, real tight. And now I'm going to take the eye of the needle and push it down over those pinched threads. Get real tight to the, hardly any of the thread is poking out here. And just push the needle down into there. You don't even really need to see what you're doing. Let's see if I can do this. It's tight. There we go. And grabbing all the threads with that loop, pull it through. And you don't hardly even have to look at what you're doing. Give yourself a little tail there so it doesn't slide out. Now, because this thread is so thick, we only want the smallest knot that possible. So just go ahead and roll it with your fingers. Make a little tail and just make it the knot as small as possible. To bury your knot, now I'm right-handed, so I'm going to be working with my right hand towards my left hand. The left hand is going to be scrunching up all the fabric. If you were left-handed, you would have this whole assembly turned around, scrunch the fabric with your right hand, having as small of a bulk as possible. And then you, of course, would be sewing with your left hand, but I can't even demonstrate that for you. So to start, scrunch up your fabric. You're going to be going through the top layer only, not through the back. You're not drawing the needle through the back of this, and I even try to avoid the batting. Try to just go to the on the front of the quilt and start. The needle's going to come out where I want my stitch line to start. So push that through. And this is how I quilt. I use the thimble on my middle finger. And I push with that finger. Again, this is pretty tricky. And right here, because I'm coming out where there's a lot of seams, it's going to be your bulkiest right there. It's going to be a little tight. Once I get to this part of the quilt, it's going to be a lot easier to pull. So draw your thread. Now it's sitting right there on the top, and my needle is pulled out where I want to actually start the stitching line. This is how I bury this knot. And hopefully I can do this so you can see it. So I don't want to just tug on this. What might happen is it might, what I call, bruise the fabric, and it might cause some of these threads of the fabric to pull. So what I do is, with the quilt flat as possible, I take my thumb and I put it right where this knot is. And what I'm doing is I'm actually kind of guarding the fabric as this hand will pull the knot through. So there's a lot of pressure on this, and you just kind of want to pop that thread through that hole without it making any, I mean, it's going to leave a little bit of a hole, but of course that would wash out, just like if you had a pin in there or if I had the needle in there. But it's not damaged the fabric at all. And now my knot is completely buried between the layers. There's nothing on the back yet until I start stitching. Again, because this is a thick thread, this is a big needle, and this is a lot of seams here, I would only take one stitch to start. This one I'm going to try to get where it doesn't feel as bulky, and I'm actually going to push that needle through the back of the quilt. And with my left hand, or the non-dominant hand that has scrunched up your fabric, I'm going to use one of my fingers to roll the needle back into the quilt, and my thumb is right underneath it. It's helping to push the fabric together. And I'm going to use my thimble to push the back of that needle. Again, this is a very thick area, so it's going to take a little wiggling, and this is where it can get a little hard on your hands. If you have to, just kind of pull the back of the fabric a bit, push that needle through, and just kind of wiggle it out. Okay, this is the trickiest part. There we go. So sometimes the thread will want to knot just because it'll curl. So go ahead and kind of guide it. You want to lay it flat. You don't want to pull this tight so it puckers. That the thread should hold the layers together, but just kind of lay on the surface. So now now if I want to load up a few more stitches, I'm going to stick it through again, rock it with that bottom finger underneath here so it pops out, rock it down, rock it up, oops, there we go. My thread kind of caught on my hands are sweaty from doing a video. There we go. Okay, push it through. And this is how I hold my needle. Again, it's, you know, you've got this big needle here. You're pulling it out. Just safety first. I sort of guard the needle as I pull it, and I can pull it away from me. Now with hand quilting, it doesn't matter, especially with, I'm purposely wanting chunky stitches here. So it's not, you know, fine, tiny stitches. The key is, I don't care how big your stitches are, just try to get them even. It's going to look the best if each of the stitches basically show the same amount, and it's kind of nice, well, however size this stitch is, that you have the same amount of space between. So the gaps and stitches are evenly spaced, there's a consistency to your work, and that's what's going to make your hand stitching look good, regardless of the size of it, is to have just consistency. And it doesn't matter if you feel comfortable having the stitches on this side of the tape or this side. Just when you put your tape down, again, if you have a consistency that I know, for my purposes here, I know that this side of the tape is always the side I'm going to be using. Again, I wouldn't accidentally then start stitching on this side if there's a change. So, you know, it just makes your life easier if you, once you find something that works, just keep doing it the same way, and then pretty soon it's just not something, it's more of a reflex, so you don't have to think about it. So just in this case, I'm not loading up a lot of stitches just because it is a little tough to pull these through, so about 2 stitches is all I do. And I would continue on until I got to the end here. I'm going to, because this is on the end, I have, in this case, I just put my knot in what's going to be the seam allowance where the binding is going to catch. So that'll catch it, and then when I trim all this off, these little tails will be cut off. This one, it's buried between the layers, and again, that will be caught in the binding seam allowance. So ending off is real easy. It's basically just putting a knot in the end of the thread. And then once I get this all done, of course, I remove my tape, and that's how to do hand sewing. It's kind of fun. Again, if you had thinner, tinier needle, like a quilting needle and quilting thread, it's a whole lot easier than with the embroidery. But the embroidery is just actually you're embellishing this quilt and creating just one more layer to the story of this quilt. And so this is a nice feature. It's kind of like the cherry on the top of the sundae.